All right. Happy Friday and welcome to our roundtable about edgifying the world and building the next digital ecosystem together. I'm Faye Arjumandi, the founder and CEO of Mimik, hosting this event. A bit about my background. I'm a serial entrepreneur, always looking for innovation with big social impact. I've been the senior executives at small and large corporations, such as being the CEO of Vodafone Zone, where I focused on disruptive innovation and venture investment globally. Over time, I became quite passionate about stopping the data robbery, which is a major threat over our society. With me, today, I have a circle of thought leaders on this panel from Mimik and senior executives of our partner, IBM. Everistus, thank you for being with us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I lost you for a bit there, but I think you're asking me to introduce myself.
Oh, yes, yeah, please.
I did lose you. I did lose you temporarily. Sorry about that. So I'm Everistus Spence. I am the general manager of IBM's hybrid cloud and edge ecosystem. So I work with a broad range of our ecosystem partners to enable them on IBM's hybrid cloud platform so they can use it to drive value for their own customers as well. I have a particular focus right now on the global systems integrators. So we work with them on building solutions on top of IBM's hybrid cloud platform and building practices based around IBM's hybrid cloud platform so they can use it to accelerate their clients' journeys to digital transformation.
Wonderful.
I'm to be with you here today.
Wonderful. And Everistus, I don't know if you remember, we almost met this time last year. At the first Woman in Cloud event. And I think it was one of the first virtual events. It was right at the midst of, we don't know whether we're staying home or we're going to work. It was a very delightful meeting that I had and great experience, great memories of that day. And our next panelist is Rob. Welcome, Rob. It's great to be with you here. So perhaps it would be great if you give us some brief background of yourself for our attendees.
Sure, thanks, Faye. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm Rob Hyam, the CTO for IBM's Edge and Network Computing business. Have been serving in this role now for about 3 years as we build up our capabilities and business in this space. Prior to that, I was CTO for IBM Watson and set the technical strategy for our AI offerings and capabilities, largely based on the work that was done. Some of you may remember the Watson for Jeopardy event that brought a lot of notoriety to the idea of AI. And so, I bring that skill and knowledge to the table and how we're applying it now to edge computing.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm excited about talking about all those, new technology trends and ecosystem with all of you. And finally, my comrade, Michel, my friend, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Michel Burger. I'm the CTO of Mimik. I've been in innovation on distributed system technology for about 30 years now, from network to application, from network equipment to solution provider to integrators, from startup to large organization, from a junior engineer to a distinguished fellow. I've gone through many mistakes, few success, and but I've covered quite a lot of the aspect of distributed system solution. Defining API and microservices based system which span from the cloud to the edge is my passion. So I'm excited to be in this panel.
And I guess one thing about Michel and I, we love going around the Stanley Park in Vancouver whenever we're there for 10 to 12 miles of walk. and talking about connecting life with technology constantly. Great memories, and hopefully when we go back to Vancouver together, we can do one of those again. So it's we are living actually in a interesting time of our lives, because there are so many trends coming together. The 4 key trends that often we hear about it are the AI, smart mobility, robotic, and blockchain, as they are intersecting. That made us to believe that we are in the midst of transition from mobile internet era to the hyper-connected world era. And that has accelerated the demand for digital transformation. And also that has also been accelerated even more, that demand for digital transformation, due to COVID, which actually request for a lot of automation across business processes. It's constantly being discussed by large enterprises, and also new solutions that the startups are bringing to market. The mobile internet era was about mobile connecting to internet and consuming content, consuming information. The hyper-connected world is about digital intersecting with every aspect of our physical life. So as we sit at every moment, we have digital surrounding our life, whether it's in the home, manufacturing plant, or in a healthcare institution. This will actually as you can imagine, these digital solutions around us is actually about mimicking the physical interaction that we have every day into the digital solutions. This drives the innovation of new platform, new solutions, and the demand for new ecosystems. Partnerships that actually will bring all these different aspects of technology and business and services together in order to drive the hyper-connected world. Speaking of which, Everistas, you're leading the Cloud Pak in IBM. That's one of the main focus that you have. Why don't you unpack the Cloud Pak for our audience and highlight the importance of ecosystem partnerships?
Thank you very much, Faye. So think of Cloud Paks as IBM software which has been containerized, and so it's cloud native, and it's built on Red Hat OpenShift, which is built on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And the importance of Red Hat OpenShift is that it's an enterprise-grade, secure container Kubernetes environment that can enable customers to build applications, to manage applications, to run applications in an open way, so that you can treat all of your estate, whether you're building applications for the edge, whether it's going to run in a hybrid cloud data center, or whether it's going to run in a public cloud, all the same way, right? So it's IBM software, containerized, cloud native, built on Red Hat OpenShift. Then the next thing is, what does it do? Well, it's really targeted at 4 different types of things that our clients want to do. Our clients either want to modernize their infrastructure, and we have Cloud Paks that are designed to enable them to do the modernization of their infrastructure, again, built on Red Hat OpenShift. Once they've modernized it, what do you want to do? You want to be able to predict. Inside, you can predict. We've got a number of different Cloud Paks that are focused at clients that are interested in prediction. Cloud Pak for data is an important one, but you also have some other Watson assets that are designed to do that. Watson technology that builds on top of Red Hat OpenShift. Then you've got clients that want to be able to automate. So what do you need to do in terms of automation? We've got a number of Cloud Paks. Are you automating business processes? And we've got Cloud Pak for business automation. You may also have Cloud Pak for network automation, where you're trying to help telco clients modernize and also automate their virtual network function processes. Then you also have things like AI Ops, providing greater visibility into your operations. AI Ops is all the rage right now. We have a Cloud Pak for what's in AI Ops that allows you to focus on automation. And then there's security, of course, which is the last thing that, one of the 4 things that we think we see our clients want to do all the time. And we have offerings like Verify and Curator, but you have the Cloud Pak for security that brings all of them together. So summary, software which is containerized, build on Red Hat OpenShift, so you can run it in any type of environment, focused at 4 different types of use cases, whether you're modernizing, whether you're securing, whether you're predicting, or whether you're automating.
Which I think in a lot of cases, enterprises eventually need all the 4, right? In terms of modernization with security elements and to automate a business processes, right? So they be pretty much over time, that's the intersections that they all need. Rob, how does edge computing plays in this ecosystem, and what is the market for it right now?
Well, so the first thing we need to understand is that the edge and the cloud share a lot of in common in that, you know, cloud native development practices, the idea of containerization, componentization, separation of concerns, loose coupling, the CI/CD process, the DevOps, the agile development practices that we kind of associate with the golden standard for software engineering these days. Can be and should be applied to the edge. On the other hand, there are certain fundamental differences between the edge and the cloud. Edges tend to be much more diverse. There's a lot more variation in the underlying compute architecture, configurations, purpose, and locations where edge computing is being performed as compared to the cloud. They're much more dynamic. They change, the systems get reconfigured, the purposes change, things get put on mobile platforms and moved around. And so that's also a big difference as compared to the cloud, at least as an order of magnitude more complex. The attack surfaces are different. You know, the edge tends to be out there in the open. It's in the wild. You got people walking around these edge locations, and you know, you have to protect against whatever it is they might do, or even the kinds of instabilities that you have to deal with at the edge. And of course, all of that is amplified and magnified by scale. You know, if a cloud data center, you know, has thousands of servers, it's generally in a few locations. At the edge, we're dealing with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of devices and servers at, you know, thousands or hundreds of different locations. And so when we think about that, we have to sort of begin to reimagine, how do we manage all that? And how do we ensure that we get the right software to the right place at the right time, and do so securely, and do so in the presence of all the diversity and change that exists out there? And so that's where we've been focusing on, is not just the capabilities that you want to associate with the applications, but also how you then manage those capabilities in that kind of complex environment.
Oh, wow, that's actually, you're highlighting a very interesting point, especially in terms of the varieties of devices, right? Because whether it's a robotic arm, or whether it's a phone in your hand, or a smart car, these devices are continuously going to have more power. They're all going to be connected, and they have enough memory and CPU to process things. But with variety also comes the challenges of integration. You know, how do I think about it from the enterprise point of view? Michelle, on that, how do we facilitate the integration issues within this massive variety of device operating system, different form of connectivities? How do we actually facilitate that?
Well, one key aspect is first, as Rob mentioned, this containerization or virtualization, in the sense that you want to first provide some level of abstraction of the infrastructure itself. But then, from a pure application perspective, some level of virtualization, but also at the application level, the notion of using API and this microservice-based architecture is a way to facilitate the integration, because it is about describing the different component in a way that it's clearly understood by everybody. So in a way, if you now can run microservice and API at the edge, you basically create this ecosystem, as well as the same way the backend systems are running. And that's the reason why, like Evaristus said, it's not a discontinuity. You have a continuum of application development between the backend and the front end, and it's not a different model. See, like some people are proposing a different model to do development at the edge, and actually no, it is about API, it is about microservice, and as Rob mentioned on the new things associated with the edge, it is about trustless environment, where basically you have to protect every API individually, instead of assuming that there will be a firewall or something of this nature. And finally, to facilitate the integration at the edge, the ability to create this context, we call it like ad hoc at service mesh, in order to basically allow device and to discover each other, in order to make sure that they can communicate with each other, is also an important aspect of the how to facilitate the integration and how to make the model very similar from a back-end to front-end perspective.
So pretty much a notion of device as a service, or approach with an API focus to the device, so that you can pretty much allow the variety to communicate with each other as long as they can kind of interface each other and have know their own API. That's basically what you're saying. Yeah. But how should the businesses, I mean, one of the biggest challenge, we talk obviously with a lot of enterprises, customers, they know that they need the digital solutions. It seems that from their point of view, almost like, how do I start? Where do I start? You know, I have this big problem. I'm a large enterprise. I know I want to have all these digital solutions and automation to address my business needs. What are your thoughts? I mean, as a panel, in terms of starting that journey, and how clients benefit from edge computing? And this is, you know, perhaps Rob or Evaristus, Michelle, who wants to start on that?
Yeah, so let me open the conversation here with this. That you ask, how do businesses start, and what's the best thing for them to start on? Actually, I find that the business side of the enterprise organizations that we're talking to have a pretty clear understanding of where they start, because they're the ones that are facing the business issues that today are compelling. As you said earlier, Faye, this digital transformation. I mean, COVID is a really good example of why digital transformation is so critical. You can't, if you're a retailer, you couldn't survive the pandemic and the closing down of our economy unless you had a digital presence, unless you had buy online and pick up at the store. You couldn't, if you go into any restaurants that happen to be open over the last year, probably what you've seen is that almost all of them now, in order to avoid handing out paper menus, now give you a QR code to go look up their menu online. And many of those, in fact, are, even if you're in the restaurant, you're ordering online and they deliver to your table. Those are small examples. Of course, manufacturing, distribution, everybody else has kind of had to go through a similar sort of thing. So, I think businesses know that they have to transform, and the reasons for doing so are quite obvious for many of them. The disconnect, I think, is that I find a lot of the IT organizations are not prepared to step into that. They're either already so heavily occupied with their backlog of issues that taking the time to figure out how to now address this new set of business requirements is daunting and requires that they shift their resources, and that's problematic. But also, there are a lot of unknowns in this edge world, things that IT organizations haven't had a lot of experience with. As I said, the edge is different than the cloud, and to be able to manage at the edge requires that you rethink how do you do that without imposing a bunch of IT resources out at the retail store or in the distribution center or anywhere else. You have to be able to do this remotely. You have to be able to have remote control over managing not only the infrastructure, but also the placement of the applications. And while we have technologies, I mean, both Mimik and IBM now together have been working on solving that management problem, IT organizations don't have a lot of experience with it and still have to come around to learning how to do that. So, I mean, for me, the simple answer is, how do you get started? You get started with anything. You get started perhaps with a small example, but something where you could begin to get your feet wet and learn.
Sure, and in a sense, you could avoid a large project, which generally lead to not much, by starting by the edge and by starting by small initiative, which basically bring things together at the edge before even hitting the backend system. Because in a sense, as you mentioned, Rob, about IT not being ready, but IT has already a lot of problem trying to bring multiple systems together. And if you start to do this outside of a true IT environment at the edge and start small, you basically could start this conversion, and immediately this identifies the scenarios, which basically will demonstrate why you want to do that.
Yeah, and Michelle, just to add to that as well, I mean, the different methodologies that work for this, because part of this is you want to co-create the solution together. The very small solution, as Rob said, and as you said, Michelle, and IBM uses a methodology called a garage, where you get together a small group of your experts, whether they're service providers, whether they're part of your IT, and certainly your sponsor from the line of business, to work through over a 2 to 3 month period, where you ideate on the minimum viable product that you're going to deliver at the end of that period. You code it, you deploy it, you test it with the sponsor users to see whether it delivered the business value, and then before you go on to expand it. And this is a really good example. You could deploy to any one of these potential edge use cases, whether you're thinking about how to reopen safely, whether you're thinking about how to deal with supply chain issues at your factory or some location that is disconnected at times. This offers good opportunities.
Yeah, Everest, I think part of what you're saying really highlights the importance of things like agile development practices, because you want to get into a position where you're able to rapidly iterate and evolve and grow that, even as your business is starting to grow its own understanding of what's needed.
So a more iterative approach. Just have a vision of where you want to go, but start small and iterate with it. And And just like you guys, and again, we work together on a few customer opportunities, but we're also seeing that there is a high demand for that high touch approach, even from us, in terms of talk to the customer, help them with even formulate the idea, the product idea that they have in mind. It's almost like describing it, iterating it, and developing it together, which actually one of the biggest challenge that I think people need to kind of overcome is that you don't need to know everything from the beginning, as long as you choose the right almost application architecture, and you choose the platform that allows you to work cross-device, cross-OS, cross-network, and cross even solutions, backends, cloud, which brings us back to the ecosystem, right? In terms of that, in order for us to increase the adoption, we have to work together as an ecosystem and help the enterprises that they can go through that journey. And in terms of ecosystem, I mean, we come from, Michelle and I both come from a long history of operators. There is always this notion of what is the definition of ecosystem? How much do we want to control the narrative for a developer, right? In terms of, okay, at the end of the day, if you want to develop a solution, you have to follow all these stacks in order to deliver X, or take an internet model that basically everybody just agreed on HTTP protocol and the internet got created in that fashion. What are your thoughts on that?
So let me just chime a little bit on that. I mean, I think of ecosystem really broadly, right? So, and in fact, you see many customers becoming ecosystem because they have their own ecosystem of partners that they work with that they can bring into your ecosystem to get bigger and bigger. And so if you think about, you've got device manufacturers, you've got software manufacturers that make software that needs to work with those devices. You've got your independent software vendors. You've got your service providers that need to build and put together all of these solutions together. They're all part of the same ecosystems. And what's important then is that you can enable all of them. Michelle made this point earlier on, right? That they can work across the different parts of the technology spectrum using the same sort of tools, right? So, and clients are increasingly, they look at edge, cloud, and data center just as different parts of exactly the same technology estate. And so the ability of these clients to build, to deploy, to manage the same way across all of that is becoming even more important. And you cannot do edge given the number of different devices that you have, service providers, the hardware manufacturers that are all involved, without having a common way of doing things. And so you're always dealing in a hybrid cloud infrastructure. And that's why, we built our own solution based on open standards that built on Red Hat OpenShift, so that, anyone you can build, you can run, you can manage securely, and you can do so openly, and you can do so at scale, right? We see different partners that bring different types of solutions. Then you've got your ecosystem that brings your end-to-end solution, right? So, this idea of cloud to edge. And so obviously I talked about Red Hat OpenShift, but we also are a founding member of the Linux Foundation Edge, right? And IBM Edge Application Manager is built on open standards. So that enables other partners then who can come in there, they can build on it, they can innovate on it. And so this idea of open source as an innovative environment in which everyone can contribute and get something out of it, I think is really important to ecosystem, because that's how you take advantage of everything that ecosystems can bring to help make the whole even stronger and even better.
And
go ahead, Michelle.
What I was saying is, you're totally right, Everestus, on that. The danger sometimes, and coming from operators, there are a lot of these things, but then you have so much constraint associated with and new models. I remember like IMS, which was basically trying to build an ecosystem at the operator level. And nobody went, or very few people went to this ecosystem because the constraints were too high, and the things, or the new things, or the different thing you had to do was too high. Which means that if you now start to think about ecosystem which are open and based on a small set of foundational technology like API, microservice, virtualization, and deployment type mechanism. Now you bring models which are similar from backend to a front end, and doesn't lock you to a specific backend, because in a sense, when you look at today, many ecosystems provided by some large cloud provider is actually a mechanism to lock you to their backend system. And what we found extremely interesting with IBM was to be more holistic in the approach, and more encompassing, versus trying to basically lock to a specific backend or lock to a specific model.
Yeah, and just to put some numbers on this to emphasize the points that both of you guys have made so far. I mean, look, there's easily 15 billion edge devices in market already today, probably growing to 55 billion, and we believe probably getting to maybe as many as 150 billion edge devices in the next few years. Those numbers are enormous. They're astronomical. Where each edge device is its own compute. It's its own capability to implement and deploy and serve a set of capability, software to solve a set of business functions, business requirements. So when you think about those kinds of numbers, you quickly realize none of us, IBM, Mimic, Microsoft, Amazon, none of us are in a position to dictate how this is going to be done, or how this is going to evolve. We have to expect that this will be defined. The evolution of this space is going to be, first of all, defined through a community effect, but just as importantly, any kind of coherent value that we get out of the potential of the edge computing to bring to the table will only occur if we, on the one hand, develop standards, on the other hand, build value chains where none of us are really in a position to say everything is centered around our value, but rather we are a value that participates in a larger graph of value. And I think when we think about it that way, not only is it more healthy, but frankly, it's necessary in order for this marketplace to really achieve the objectives that I think has the potential to deliver on.
Absolutely, and I think actually a couple of highlights based on all your responses is that the major shift in a hyper-connected world is that all these edge devices, right? And these devices producing data. So there is a massive amount of data that gets now produced at the device level. And mobile was, I go to browser, I go to internet to bring content. But now these devices producing massive amount of data right at the place where the compute is. And that's one of the differences, because then especially I think Martin Banks was pointing out on one of the questions in our question channel, that the first generation of services, mobile internet, was about take data to where the compute is. But in this transformational society toward digital, devices are now creating data where the compute is. And the only way that we can actually scale with the demand for digital with the growth of devices coming to market, again, is to be able to play the ecosystem. And to us, like, for example, the approach that Mimik took is that let's bring the ability of processing data at the compute level where the data source is. And the only thing the best thing we can do to accelerate utilization of the compute on device and creation of digital solutions is to support the community with a cloud native application architecture, so-called microservice-driven architecture with RESTful API. Because now we could have those work orders processed at the device that you can reach the processing of the task on the device and have an API defined on the application level, on the edge level. That's where Mimik Edge Engine is actually, that's one of the efforts that we have been doing, that now you are allowed, you can do iterative design, development, and delivery. And as you realize that I need to integrate with different pieces, you now do API integration. This is one of the things that we did with IBM, with you guys, in terms of when we integrated our Edge Engine with IBM Open Horizon. Things moved very fast because we both had this API-driven architecture. And now each company can continue innovate individually together and yet be able to kind of create this intelligent workflows, which I think, go ahead.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to kind of come back to a point that you made about, your observation that, the compute now is where the data is. I think the corresponding observation that's worth highlighting here is that where the data is being created, which, by the way, tends to be most often in the environment that humans operate. So it's either from the humans themselves or from the environments in which we operate. It could be from other machines or others, but otherwise, but still, where that data is created is also, it coincides with where actions need to be taken. So, the fact that this data is being generated is only useful if we do something with that, compute on it in a way that then informs the actions that we need to take. And really, in some ways, what I think you're describing, Faye, is there's an opportunity for us to short circuit the distance between the creation of the data, the processing of it, and the actions that we take from those results. And I believe that's really what's driving and motivating at the heart of most of what we see in the use cases we see around edge computing, the idea of why we want to move compute closer to where that data is being produced.
And it's beyond the compute, which makes the data actionable almost immediately, instead of having raw data which need to be actionable or which need to be made actionable in the cloud. You also have this notion of context, which means it's not just one device by itself generating data, which now is giving input back to the device itself. It's actually a collection of nodes at the edge, which basically need to interact between each other. So like if I am in a warehouse and I have 1,000 cameras, I may want to follow somebody, or I may want to have all of this camera collaborate in some form of choreography in order to make decision locally without even have to go to the cloud, because first there is no time, and second is the intelligence is already there. So why not then having all of this device or the microservice running on this device talking to each other in some form of ad hoc edge service mesh in order to be able to provide solutions.
And Michelle, you can add the third to that, which is cost, right? Because obviously you've got the bandwidth cost of transferring all of this data to do the analytics. And I saw some numbers showing, less than 1% of that data is actually actionable. That goes back. So you spent huge amounts on bandwidth to get the data to a cloud to do the processing. but you only really need 1% of the data. So you didn't really need to move all of that. You can do it at the source where the data is created. And so you have a significant reduction in cost. But it also means that you can maintain continuous operations where when you don't have a connectivity back into your cloud, because again, the actions that need to be taken are based on analytics that is running at the edge. There's no need for you to go outside of that in order to determine whether you need to stop something or start something.
That's actually, these are all excellent points. And I'll add to that about data privacy, right? Because I think data privacy is also playing a huge role here. And one of the advantages of Edge is that you can actually process data, even if it means anonymize it, turn it into information, and then decide which piece of information finally visible to who and where it should go. So it's almost like you provide privacy-driven smart routing right from the device level. Who should I give this piece of information to? Should I give this piece of information to the finance, or should I give this piece of information to the HR? You know, because depending on what the action is and what the knowledge is, and at any moment is beyond just one piece of information, right? And it's beyond just one action. Let's say that if a camera detecting a person based on an AI model that is pushed to the device, depending on those actions, depending on the model and depending on the variety of what is happening at edge, the information need to be shared with different audience. And then the other element around edge is 5G, right? People always associate edge and 5G together. We always say that these two are two different technology, right? One gives the connectivity. The other is, one is about faster tactile communication. And the other one, edge, is about being able to process data on device. How does 5G also plays into the enterprise life cycle today in terms of automation, in terms of processing business intelligence?
Yeah, so 5G is interesting because obviously part of the promise and value of 5G is that it offers lower latency and higher bandwidth connectivity. But I think beyond that, it's also interesting to realize how 5G now is being applied in private networks. I would argue that, in fact, 5G disproportionately advantages mobile computing, mobile connectivity in enterprise scenarios more so than, for example, consumers, as we saw in 4G and LTE. 4G and LTE was mostly about consumer attachment to things like mobile devices. In the enterprise world, 5G will bring both the capability to connect equipment on the factory floor, in the retail store, in the distribution centers, and all those places where businesses are performed at a much lower cost than, certainly lower cost than if you had to wire connect all of that equipment. And because of the spectrums that 5G is able to operate at, it actually has less interference with equipment in these industrial environments than, let's say, for example, Wi-Fi has had. And so for those reasons, I think we're going to see 5G being brought into these environments. And in some ways, because of that, it really kind of expands. It rapidly encourages the use of edge computing, because now all that equipment that has the potential to be enabled with compute, I'm talking about robots and and assembly machines and stackers and sorters and retail point of sale terminals, and of course intelligent cameras, which you already mentioned, Faye, but also all the other variety of intelligent equipment that was potential out there but inhibited because we couldn't really efficiently and economically connect it. Now suddenly that equipment can be connected, and that connectivity then is going to expand our utility of the compute that's on that equipment. So in many ways, 5G will accelerate edge computing adoption. On the other hand, in many ways, 5G absolutely demands edge computing. It's almost a prerequisite to 5G because, well, the issues of latency and bandwidth. Well, guess what? You got the laws of physics in the way, right? I mean, yes, of course, 5G reduces the latency from the device to the cell tower by half, I mean, by a substantial amount. But that's not the real effective latency. The effective latency is the distance between that device and the cloud and the return response time that you need in order to do anything like process the data and take action on it. And there's no way to overcome that distance or that latency without reducing the physical distance. So that means moving the workloads closer to where the data is being generated, or actually where the devices are. And likewise, the core network still has bottlenecks in. And the biggest bottleneck is in the packet core back to the data center. Again, the only way to overcome those bandwidth issues are by leapfrogging over those bottlenecks. And so I think in that way, 5G will absolutely depend on edge computing.
Now, to add to aspect, and that's in a way the misnomer of 5G being a network. Actually, it's more an IT issue than a network issue. From a network perspective, yes, you're going to win some bandwidth and latency, but actually the big gain will be to sync IT completely differently, which basically is a challenge for operators, and for enterprise, is to think that now the way you design solutions have to be in a way that you have many components, and some of them will run at the edge, some of them will run in a backend data center. It's not anymore about client server, it's more about application microservices. And because you have microservices, you need APIs and things like this. And that's, for me, the transformative aspect of 5G is actually push people to, one, understand that you cannot just have a monolith running on the back end. You have to really think about a continuum of resource from the back end to the device, including the device, because in many cases, even in 5G, people see the device being still attached to the network. And in a sense, with the mimik IBM technology, the device is now part of that. It's not something attached, is actually an active component on which microservice will run, on which model will be executed in order to make the data actionable way, way faster.
Yeah, it's go ahead, sorry,
I was just going to say, I absolutely agree with all that. And in fact, this idea of private 5G actually enabling edge, I think you're going to see lots of use cases coming up around Industry 4.0. Some of the work that you need to do to modernize both IT and to bring IT and OT together among the OT manufacturers. All of that, I think, really gets accelerated by 5G as well.
Yeah, it reminds me in the time where, see, in Nanterre, I was working on PIBX, the private branch exchange. And guess what? 5G, in a way, re-enable this notion of virtual PBX in mobile, in a mobile environment where you have private network, private system, which basically reduce cost for the enterprise, but also give more control to the enterprise, how they manage the routing and things like this. And basically 5G re-enable that.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of, on one side, 5G need edge or edge needs 5G. In fact, one of the reasons why Mimik was invited to the 5G Open Innovation Lab was to accelerate the adoption for 5G. But we always believe, like, at the end of the day, you're going to have heterogeneous networks as well, heterogeneous connectivity. So it's going to be a combination of connectivity at any point that multiple devices need to communicate with each other. And today, we have customers that actually developing their applications with Mimic platform. And these are your everyday applications, you know, like the wellness application or the banking fintech application that now they develop based on the macro service architecture. They can decompose their front-end application logic to serverless microservices, as well as bringing some of the traditional data processing that is done in the backend on the device side. And over time, as these solutions need to evolve, they just add new microservice with new RESTful APIs that they can still interact. So the reason I'm saying that is to say that edge is not dependent on 5G. Edge will be a savior of actually 5G, and it's an important element. Otherwise, you have fast tactile communication and then a slow communication to the backend. And that also brings us to the notion of AI that I want to touch on, because when it comes to AI, the context of the environment become very important. And everybody, a lot of discussions around AI is that, okay, there is one big brain in cloud, versus AI is really about distribution of intelligence everywhere and being able to drive to an action. How do you see context and AI, edge AI and the context be so important, both in terms of the business processes and processing intelligence and distribution of functions?
Yeah, I mean, Michelle actually spoke a little bit to this point earlier too, which is, before I get into that, let me just back up here to say, you know, Faye, it's worthwhile, I think, for most people to recognize that sometimes the term AI gets overloaded, and we use the term AI to mean more than what it really should be used for. So let's make a subtle distinction between machine learning algorithms and AI, where AI is a special case of machine learning that is being applied to typically human expressions, right? Language, vocalizations, auditory, visual, the things that humans are really good at recognizing and, in fact, intellectualizing on. You know, that's a special case of both data and processing, as distinct from general machine learning, which could be applied to any number of quantitative problems and has been and for many years now. And with that in mind, then if we focus on AI to mean specifically things that have relevance to human experience, then you have to think about how humans interpret the things that we experience. And context absolutely matters. I mean, you know, even our language is full of ambiguity that we as humans don't always have a conscious appreciation of, but the reality is that our words are missing a lot of details that in without context would be impossible to really understand. It's our context, it's our shared understanding, it is the shared experiences that we have even in the present that allows us to kind of fill in the gaps of knowledge. And so context absolutely matters. Now you have to think about that in the way that we've been talking about edge computing here so far. If we do what we've traditionally done, which is taken all the data that comes out of those environments that we were part of through sensor data and ship that back to the cloud, well, that's all we have is whatever data was collected through that set of sensors, which, you know, may or may not be enough. And if it's AI-based data that AIs are going to operate on to interpret, then almost by definition, it's going to miss context. Mm-hmm. Now, if you bring that same workload back close to where that data is being produced, you have a better chance of expanding the aperture of other contextual information that will help fill in those gaps. And so I do believe that context really matters for AI-based workloads in a way that perhaps, machine learning doesn't always care about, because if we apply that to other sort of quantitative things, then typically we have enough sort of structure around the collection of that data that we don't really need that additional context to be able to get those things to work well.
And one piece which is important is also to realize that these contexts are extremely dynamic, meaning that you have to, they evolve quickly, and the model need to evolve quickly. So that's where, for me, I see the partnership between IBM and Mimik working extremely well, because with Open Horizon, we have like a kind of like a device management on steroid, where basically we can update models and algorithms extremely quickly. And then with Mimik, we go to every device the application and edge manager of IBM doesn't cover, but also we provide this dynamic context on a real-time basis, which means that now everything is dynamic and evolve quickly, not only because we need to update things quickly, but because of all the situation constantly change. Remember, the closer to the edge you are, the closer to the reality you are. And the closer you are to have to mimic the reality compared to trying to replicate this reality in a large data center, where now you have to go through a lot of hoops in order to do that.
Yeah, and that ties back to the point that I think Faye and Everest made earlier on when we talked about, the need to rapidly evolve, the information system to match the needs of the business. It's the same problem, right? You really want to start small and then rapidly iterate, which also includes iterating your models and iterating your algorithms so that they get smarter even as you're applying that capability to your business in a more intelligent way.
So before, that these are all very important. Before we end this roundtable, we have only a few minutes left. I just want to, from your point of view, Everest, perhaps, what are some of the vertical industries that are leading in digital transformation? We're seeing manufacturing, we're seeing mining, areas that connectivities are challenging. Are you seeing the same type of sectors? What are your?
I think there are use cases in all sectors, right? Whether you're talking about, even in financial services, you're talking about healthcare. And again, sometimes you think narrowly about edge computing, right? If you've got a device that needs somebody to go in there and update the software on it on an annual basis, is there a way for you to do this so that the updates happen over the air, or so that the updates happen without somebody having to go there? And so as you look through, you can think about ATMs, you can think about warehouses, you can think about drilling locations. And then, of course, you talked about Industry 4.0 use cases, for example. You've got forklift trucks that you've got, in some factories, you've got individuals that have to go find these trucks and bring them back to base. So somebody knows to pick them up from there and go deliver produce elsewhere. Is there a way for us to use edge computing so that we know where they are and so they effectively can get back to base? And so I see these use cases right across the board.
Beautiful. So with that, I think we're summarizing that pretty much the benefits of hybrid edge cloud computing are reducing cost, reducing bandwidth consumption, reducing the latency, be able to provide process data in more real time and drive to a decision, to an action, increase the data privacy and security, and pretty much it enables a systematic approach to a digital transformation to get the benefit of ecosystem. That's mainly the conclusion that I think we can take from these discussions. With that, I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion. We're here to work together. Let's edgeify the world to create a next generation of digital economy. We're going to have more of these discussions in upcoming months. We're going to announce workshops, developer workshops together with IBM and our partners. And stay tuned and let's work together. Thank you, Rob, Everestos, Michelle, for these great discussions. And I'm sure our colleagues have put links on the channel and Q&A about both Mimik and IBM. Looking forward to working with everyone.